All right, guys, it's October, and normally we make kind of like a 5 favorite baits for October. This month, we thought we'd try something a little bit different and do 5 baits that I think you should try this October. These are baits that some of them are on the radar, some of them are off the radar, but all of these have moments this time of the year that they can be incredibly good. And I know a lot of these aren't in a lot of your arsenal. So if you'd like to have some fun exploring possibly some new baits and techniques and ways to catch them this month, let's have a good time. Let's go. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle.
Oh, what a stud.
Yeah. Look at that.
That was sick.
Woo!
Cheers, my friends. Happy Sunday. All right, guys, some breaking news. What's new this week at the Hookup Tackle?
What a beautiful post-spawn fish.
Look at that.
Look at that gut on that. That's a nice fish.
Welcome back. I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, the Tackle Otaku on Instagram, being joined by my delicious beer, Orion, and my buddy, Jeff.
I'm glad the beer comes before me.
Of course.
You say that. I think it's a good thing.
Beer, wife, kids,
Oh, wow.
bass, trout, tarpon.
Ooh,
You're down there somewhere.
wow. I
Yeah.
just.
Well, I mean, drink with me every once in a while, motherfucker. Maybe
oh,
I'll...
and I could go up the rink?
Yeah, I'll move
Really?
you up. Yeah.
That's all it takes?
Mhm.
I'll stay down.
Okay. You're never going to get this bod. Are we talking about beer? Or are we talking about tackle?
We normally just talk about beer.
Well, let's talk about tackle. All right. So, October.
It's October. I love
It's
this
one of those months that, depending on where you are, a lot of things can be changing. It's really probably the biggest transition month, I would say, of the year.
Oh, yeah.
I would say maybe even stronger than like spring transition months. Because
Yeah.
spring, I feel like, is more of a moon phase and it's like drawn out in batches,
Mhm.
right? But I feel like fall transition happens to everything at the same time.
Yeah.
Like I feel the whole body of water, wherever you are, like, boom, we're all in. You know what I mean? So it's like these big changes that start to happen, and they happen very fast.
Yeah.
So, you know, I feel like spring transitions sometimes can take many days or weeks even to like, yeah, it's warm, but the water temp only goes up like a quarter degree a day, right? Where I feel like the fall, like by the time we've gotten to October, the fish are so done with summer, kind of like us. They're like, oh, fuck yeah. Fall,
Oh,
let's
yeah.
go, right? So they're doing their thing. So this can be such a fun month to catch them because usually the aggression is high. They're usually just worried and focused about one thing, and that's food. So like, it's really the best time to catch them aggressively feeding. So a lot of times of the year, you know, we're getting them on reaction stuff because they're not really aggressive. We're having to just get them to react to something. This time of the year, they're feeding a lot of the day, depending on the moon phase, sometimes all day. So there's a lot of different things that can work. That's why if you watch 20, you know, best baits of October video, everybody's gonna probably have 5 different things because depending on where you are or what you like to catch them on, it could be so many different things, right? So, you know, if we polled, and we did poll actually, many of us around here when we were talking about October baits, we all kind of throw the same, like, dude, we catch them on a buzz bait, we catch them on a skinny dipper, we catch them on a jerk bait, we catch them on a glide bait. Like, we kind of throw the same 3 or 4 things all the time. But that can sometimes not be a lot of fun, and it's not necessarily applicable to where you guys are. I mean, Jeff, you and I have been in Wisconsin in October, and it's been like 0 degrees.
Yeah.
And it's like, what the hell October is this, right? So you're already doing like winter stuff, ice is forming and stuff. So a lot of variables, but the baits we're going to talk about today are really fun baits, and they work really good this time of the year if you implement them. So let's dive in no particular order.
Hmm.
I'm just going to start with a crankbait, okay? Because it's probably the most normal of the things that we're going to talk about. So, we talk about crankbaits a lot. We talk about the OSP Blitz EX DR a lot. We're going to talk about it in a little bit different way today. So we're not just talking about crankbaits today. Today we're talking about kind of speed cranking. Now, speed cranking is something that really Tactical Bassin put on the map. They made it popular. A lot of you guys have been doing it. A million different ways to do it. I'm not going to refer to it in the same fashion that they're doing. They're fishing a lot of like suspended fish, live scope fish, that kind of stuff. I'm going to speak to it in a form more of just kind of burning the bank, not necessarily having anything specific that you're like you don't know there's a school of fish over here on a hump, or you don't have live scope, you're not seeing them. Of course, if you have all these tools, then dude, go jack them, go have some fun. But if you're kind of just starting, you're not really sure what to do, and you just want to run some bank, a crankbait is one of my favorite things this time of the year. If you get the right ones, you can throw it on the bank and just burn it down. And by speed on this, I'm talking about you can throw it on a 7-to-1 or an 8-to-1 and just get it going. You can just clip it around. You don't have to like hit a rock and pause all the time and let it slowly float. You can just keep it going and just grind away until you find activity. You can cover a ton of ground, okay? So the two baits that I love to do that this time of the year are these guys. So the OSP Blitz EX DR and the Megabass Super Z3. Okay, so these are two of my favorites. There's a gazillion good ones. Okay, so you know, choose whichever one you like. Color-wise, this is a great time of the year to get them on chartreuse colors, especially because a lot of these fish are going to move shallow, and the shallower water tends to be a little bit more off-colored, so chartreuse can be really good. I pretty much stay in like chartreuse or like a shad pattern. Pretty simple. Now, some places that we fish are going to be super choked with craws, river systems, that kind of stuff. So for sure have a craw one ready. But if you're fishing a reservoir or a lake, it's probably going to be a bait fish thing. Okay, so I'd stay in some kind of shad pattern. But what's great about both these crankbaits is that they're both very easy to cast. They're both small. So it's very easy to match the hatch with either of these crankbaits, right? So if they're feeding on little shad or little bait, no problem. If they're feeding on big bait, no problem. Okay, so here's the Blitz EX DR up here. Here's the Super Z3 down here. You can see very similar sized baits, right? So I think the Super Z3 gets slept on a lot because the OSP has just so much prevalence in market share in this category. But the Super Z, remember, even though it's technically in between that 1/4 and 3/8 of an ounce, it has that LBO weight transfer system, so it casts like a bullet. Okay, so either of these would be a great option. Throw some 12-pound on, some 14-pound, and just burn through. You can crank miles and miles and miles of shoreline, flat edges, weed edges, flat breaks, rock piles, wherever you are. Super versatile bait. But try that this time of the year. Try it. Try to up your tempo a little bit. Try to do less pauses on cover deflection. Just grind it through that cover deflection and see if you can get some really aggressive bites. So there would be number one for me, just a fast moving crankbait. All right, staying on a hard bait for a minute, I'm going to talk about a jerkbait. Now, a jerkbait's a pretty common thing to throw in the fall. I'm going to talk about heavy line, aggressive jerkbaiting. Okay, so I'm going to talk about something in here, either the Ito Shiner or the OSP Rudra. Now, I'm a huge fan of this guy, a huge fan of this guy. I prefer the Shiner if I'm fishing more like offshore aquatic vegetation type stuff. So if there's lots of grass and I'm fishing grass edges, I love the Shiner. I also love the Shiner when I need something really loud. Okay, so the Shiner has 3 tungsten weight transfer balls in it that help it cast like a rocket. You can see that there's 3 weights that transfer to the back. Okay, but when it's in place, this bait moves side to side, creates a lot of sound. You can hear it's a really noisy bait. Okay, so this is a great one to throw on windy days, on days where there's a lot of just sound in the water, lots of waves crashing, maybe boaters out there, or any time you're kind of offshore in aquatic vegetation. On the flip side, the Rudra is a bait that I absolutely love to kind of run bank or just kind of pound closer to shore, long cast, short cast, but it's a great one that I can throw on 14, 16, even 18 pound line and still get it to walk and have that great motion that you would expect out of like a 110, pointer 100, something like that. So I can go in the back of a creek channel around a bunch of wood, I can throw it down the edge of a dock, I can fish it through some gnarly, heavy stuff in shallow water, and have tons of confidence that I can pull them out. It's not a little finesse jerkbait that I got to twitch with 10 pound offshore. I can throw the heavier line on there, give it really hard rips, and the bait's gonna really move and perform, and it's a really fun one to use. You don't have a big window this time of the year to throw this. It's gonna be great as long as your activity is really high. And then when the water gets super, super cold, that's when you kind of have to step back with the lighter line, a 110, a more finessey jerkbait, and really let it kind of marinate in front of them. And then again in the spring, when they start getting aggressive again, then you can pull the Rudra back out. But it's a great one. If you don't have it in your arsenal, I highly recommend this, one of my favorite baits. So there you go. Hard jerking, heavy line jerkbaits. All right, let's go to soft bait. Now, we talked about skinny dippers. Okay, we talk about skinny dippers a lot this time of the year because it's just such a great bait to cast and burn. You can cover a lot of ground with it. It swims super fast, high in the column, inexpensive, good colors, just a great bait. But there are a lot of places, especially out here, where they see 9 gazillion skinny dippers. So sometimes you need to show them something just a little bit different. And so today we're going to talk about the Sakamata shad. Now, these come in a bunch of different sizes. The 7-inch is kind of the key size, I would say, for me. This time of the year, you can go down to 6 if 7's too big. I don't really mess with the 4 or the 5 as much. They're great sizes, but not for doing what we're about to talk about. For what we're going to talk about, the 7 and the 8 are really the two key sizes. 6, you can do it, but the 6 gets a little weird, okay? So what we're talking about here is we're talking about kind of like the same thing with the crankbait. We're talking about burning this guy in or speed fishing a Sakamata shad. Okay, now, Sakamata shad, of course, is basically a fluke style bait, but it's made with a dual density plastic. Okay, so the top part of the bait is a different density of salt than the bottom part of the bait. It has a little unique shape to it. It has these kind of fins here. All of these things do different features or cause the bait to have these little different movements, right? And one of those movements is little micro shaking on a burn. Okay, so usually when you see some kind of fluke bait like this, you're thinking you're going to twitch it like a jerk bait, and the bait's going to kind of have this glide, and it works great like that. It certainly does that. But on a fast retrieve, on a cast just like a skinny dipper, sink down, and you just start burning it, if you can keep this bait just under the surface, these little fins here will cause the bait to have this super micro fast vibration. You almost don't even see it, but if you pull it along the side of your boat and you really pay attention to that tail and that back end, you can see it just quivering really fast. It's going to be very lifelike to what a fish would actually see from a shad or a bait fish trying to get away. They're not going to see those fish have these big paddle movements. They're going to be really tight little movements similar to this. So rigging wise, you're going to want to get yourself like a 6 or 7/0 hook. I like a 7/0. It adds just a little bit of bulk. This happens to be an Ryugi Brutal from Ryugi, but whatever hook you like will work here. I just wanted to rig it to make sure that we're all on the same page. So you're going to basically just do this unweighted, kind of unweighted Texas rig, okay? Old school. So you're going to go all the way in. You're going to pull that in to where the knot is buried. I like it with the knot inside the bait. I line this up. This is going to come straight out. Now, Sakamata has ridges on the back where you can kind of line the bait up, and that's it. So that's essentially my rigging. I don't bury this into the bait. I leave it just like this. If I'm going to throw it through some super gnarly stuff, I can always just kind of, you know, text pose it like that. But that's not what I'm aiming for with this. What I'm aiming for is even more open water. Cross a point, down an edge. If there's a big tule line, I'm gonna make a long cast on a tule line and burn it down the tules, down a dock. You know, fish it the same way that you would normally fish a skinny dipper, but I'm going to let it sink just for a second so it gets some water underneath it, and then I'm just going to start that straight retrieve, and on that burn retrieve, that bait just comes in. And again, you can mix up your retrieve too. You could be burning it and kill it, so the bait's going to be rah, and then all of a sudden it'll just kind of kick off to the side and kind of spiral down or glide. You can add a twitch in there and it'll kind of dart and dart, and then back to speed. Okay, so you can really mix it up, but you can cover a lot of ground. There's also a lot of times this time of the year where the fish are still relatively offshore popping bait. So a lot of times, you know, you're catching them shallow, then all of a sudden they start crashing bait out here offshore. And this can be a great bait to just heave out to those fish and burn it through those schools, and you can get some really giants out offshore as well. All right, speaking of giants, okay, Jeff, I know this is kind of like the start of your season.
Oh yeah, I finally get to go fishing.
So you kind of hang it up in the summer because you're a wuss.
Wuss isn't the right word. Logical. Who doesn't want to go fishing in 115? But yeah, wuss.
Okay.
Sure.
So what happens this time of the year for you, other than weather?
Okay.
Right? I mean, obviously it's much nicer to go fishing now than it was in August. But other than weather, let's talk about fish behavior for a minute. What is it that happens to the fish that make a swim bait guy like you say, all right, cool, it's the start of my season?
Well, from that summer pattern, I find that they will eat a swim bait in it, but more time than not, they seem to want bottom contact because the water is pretty warm, and so they find that cooler water, so they're more deeper on the bottom, and they're feeding on craws and stuff like that. Obviously, you can get them early morning on a swim bait, but time and time again, it seems like once that water temperature cools, and this time of year, I see more of like the full-size threadfin spawning on the walls or on the bank. The bluegill are out, and those that spawned in March, they're starting to grow bigger and bigger, and it seems like in the fish's mind they're more willing to eat a larger lure starting this time of the month all the way through about March, April-ish.
Okay.
So it's just like this weird switch in their head where they're like, all right, I'm willing to eat this 10-inch lure, where a few months ago I wasn't feeling it.
Got it.
So I find that they start eating the big bait really, really good this time of the year.
I think what you said early on is definitely something that's important for all of us to pay attention to, and that's sometimes the fish are just glued to the bottom. They get so keyed in on craws or flows or water temp or whatever the case may be, that they're comfortable chilling on the bottom, and they know that that's where their food and their life is.
Yep.
That sometimes you throw a glide over their head or a big bait over their head, they're interested, and you might get them to kind of follow it in,
Yeah.
but they're this far off your bait because they're curious. But that kind of behavior and watching that behavior should tell you pretty quick that that's okay. They're still glued to the bottom.
Right.
I'm going to stop throwing this bait.
Yep.
I'm going to go back to my bottom stuff, which will actually be the last thing I want to talk about.
Yeah.
But as soon as that switch happens, you can get some super fresh fish
Yeah.
to eat a big bait, right? So I'm going to throw a couple of big baits out to you that I think you guys should try. Okay, so this is a Deps Slide Swimmer 250, arguably
Greatest glide bait ever made.
yeah, arguably the best glide bait ever. And this is a Tiny Klash High Float. Okay, two very different approaches. I'm going to talk about them really quick. Slide Swimmer 250 we've spoken about a lot on this channel. It is probably the staple glide, I would say, period. So what makes a slide swimmer so great, and there's many things, but really what makes a slide swimmer so great is it's a pretty easy bait to use, and it's a dependable bait. So once you get used to, whether it's a reel turn or a rod twitch or however it is that you're getting the bait to kind of glide and do its thing, it's a bait that that every time you turn that half a crank or a full crank or whatever, that the bait's going to do the same thing that it was doing before, right? So once you kind of get into a groove and a motion, it's a very easy bait to work, and the fish eat it. I mean, they've been eating it for decades. They still eat it. It's a bait that you can fish slow.
Yep.
So, you know, all of these can be weighted. I mean, it's going to be a slow sink out of the box, but you can go to smaller hooks and you can, you know, make it a little even slower sink. You can put floating boards. You can take weights out from inside and make it even float or suspend. So you can make this bait be able to have these big glides and then just sit there and then glide back and sit there. And Jeff, I've been on bites with you where if it didn't come to a complete stop, they don't touch it. And then I've been on bites with you where if this thing in like moving fast and cutting, they don't touch it.
Yeah.
So behavior can be different day to day.
Yeah. It all depends on your fish. Our fish are so messed up in the head that we have to fish it very differently. But when I go to anywhere else, it seems like a normal retrieve, like a medium speed.
Okay.
The fish will eat it.
Yeah.
Out here, the fish are a little more pressured. Since everybody's fishing in a medium, we found that fishing it slower gets bites. So it all just depends on where you're fishing. But
True.
like you said, you can fish that bait a wide variety of different ways to your liking, and how obviously the most important way is how the fish want it.
Correct.
So
color wise, Jeff doesn't believe in color. I keep it pretty simple.
Yeah.
We came out with Bonaire last year. I love that
Greatest
color. It's like
color
a
ever
bone
made.
white. Thank you, Jeff. Flash carp was really the inspiration behind that because this is the color that I've always thrown.
yeah,
But you could get
There's
basically
shad.
a shad color,
trouts.
a trout color. It doesn't really
Doesn't matter.
Get something that you think the fish visually can see.
Yeah,
Just
that's
try to
big.
match it the same way you would match, you know, you don't need 9 of these in different colors.
No.
I mean, you can get 9 of
Yeah,
them. But, you know, get 1 or 2 that you think will match kind of the color tone. And remember that most of the time these baits are going to be high in the column.
Yeah.
So most of the time the fish are seeing a silhouette
Yeah.
with maybe just a slight
Roll, maybe.
roll to where they're getting a little bit of that flash, a little bit of that white, a little bit of that trout, whatever the color may be. But it's a great bait. Realistically, I would say you need 3-pound fish to really have any fun with this.
Absolutely.
If you're fishing places where a 2-pounder is the biggest,
Might
It's-
want to move.
yeah,
Might wanna
where you live
move.
sucks,
Okay.
right? But you're gonna have a hard time catching on this. But a 3-pounder, 4-pounder,
Yeah.
they T-bone this thing all day.
Absolutely smoke it.
Okay, so it's obviously a bait that we're trying to get a big one, but if you make a good cast around a 3 or 4-pounder,
They'll eat
they're
it.
probably gonna eat it. Okay, so that would be big bait number 1. Big bait number 2, I'm gonna put this out there because this is still a sleeper. And what's funny about this bait is, you know, we posted a video a couple weeks ago with Mike Gilbert. You went out there and you were filming with Mike for his Citizen drop, and took some time to talk to him about the Tiny Klash Hi float,
Yeah.
which is a bait that he loves and that he
Loves
throws
that.
a lot. It's funny, so many times you get guys, and we've talked about this for the last 3 years. If it says float on it, people are terrified.
Oh, it's the worst thing in the world.
Like, it seems like it has to be some kind of sinking bait that you can just tie on and just
Right.
swim and have it do its stuff, right? Don't be afraid of this bait. Now, this bait's going to act a little bit different than a Tiny Klash low float, which is more of a true like chopping or gliding style bait. But this is a really cool crank down / wake bait. In this time of the year, when they are aggressive, this is a bait that you can burn. And that's why I really like this bait. So, you know, getting back to what we talked about earlier, when we were asking Ethan, like, hey, dude, what 3 things you taking to the lake today? You're asking me, like, we're going around. It's like, well, I'm taking a dipper, a buzz bait, like things that I can just fish as fast as I can, right? This kind of fits in that category. You can fish it super, super fast, and you can cover a ton of ground and get those really aggressive fish. If you get a fish to blow up, you can always slow down and get a little bit of a walk or a crank out of it. And then with the ability to change the tails and put it in different modes, change the lips and have different actions, there's just a lot of versatility that you can get out of this bait. And it's pretty small. It's only a couple ounces, so it's easy to throw. It's barely bigger in your hand. In fact,
The Sakamata's bigger.
it's, you know what I mean? So it's not much bigger than the baits that we've been talking about all day. I mean, there's
Right.
the Rudra. It's not that much bigger, honestly,
All right.
than a Rudra.
If the rudder had a tail, it'd be the same size.
It'd be the same length, right? So, you know, it's a really good, it's a good catching size.
Yeah.
But it's a fun bait to use this time of the year when you have fish that are super aggressive, you can get them to go on that. So that's the Tiny Klash High Float from DRT and the Slide Swimmer 250 from Deps. All right, and then finally, there are just times where those fish don't want to move from the bottom, dude. I mean, we saw it the other day. We went out to throw glides.
Yep.
And we've been catching them on glides. I mean, we've been having a couple good weeks, and then we got out to the river, and they just weren't having it.
Every smallmouth was like, man, that's a cool looking glide bait.
Yeah.
It was only a craw.
I'm going to go back and chill here on this rock where all the craws live.
Sit here on the bottom.
Dummies. Yeah. So after like 5 hours of trying to force feed them and realizing like this is never going to happen. I got frustrated and said, all right, I'm just going to tie on this stupid sleeper crawl and throw it in there. And literally, I missed the fish by like 9 feet, worst cast ever. And the thing's just floating down the current, and he swims over and eats it. I'm like, okay.
All right.
Yeah, all day we could have been doing this and just jacking
That's
them.
all you needed to do.
So, here we go. Bait number 5 that I think you guys should try if you're not from Megabass is the Megabass Sleeper Craw. Now, this is a bait that came out earlier this year. A lot of guys loved it. A lot of guys were kind of about it. It's one of those baits where it looks a lot like the real thing. So, you know, a lot of guys I think initially are just kind of like, it looks too lifelike. But this is a bait that if you embrace it and actually try to use it, it's one of almost everybody's favorites here. Anytime they are feeding on craws, I will preface this, almost always when we're using this in clean water. I don't think I've thrown this in dirty water now that I'm thinking back through this. So some of you that have used this in off-colored water are going to have to tell me if it has the same effectiveness. Now I'm thinking about it. I mean, ponds, but ponds don't count. That's like just strange water, right? But if you have clean to slightly stained water and the fish feed on craws, or you live anywhere near a smallmouth, dude, it's game over with this thing. So with the Sleeper Craw is a 5/8 ounce internally weighted bait that fishes a lot like a 3/8 ounce jig. Okay, so don't let that weight scare you. It's made out of an elastomer plastic, and the way that that weight is structured underneath the craw, when it sinks very slowly. It sinks horizontally, and it sinks kind of like how a natural crawfish would sink. Slow, it kind of moves and quivers. It gets to the bottom, it kind of stands up. You move it really slow, and it kind of lifts, and then it kind of has a slow sink back. It's a slow moving bait that when they're on craws, it's game over. Okay, so, you know, if you're like Jeff, you probably bring 1 or 2 rods with you, and you say, dude, if they're not biting this, I'm just going to go home. That is the Jeff way.
That's it.
It's pretty much every day you go fishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically.
Like you wake up, you leave, you're like, I'm going to catch them on this or this, or I'm going the fuck home.
That's it, dude.
But a lot of us, we might only get 1 day a week
Right.
or a couple of times a month to go out.
Yep.
And if we have 10 hours away from our beautiful wife and wonderful children, we want to make sure that we're enjoying our time on the water as much as possible, right? So if they're just not eating this fast moving stuff, sometimes you got to go to the bottom, slow things down, and the Sleeper Craw is a super dope one to do it. I would recommend throwing it on 14 or 16 pound fluoro, seems to be kind of the magic size. And you want your rod to be a little softer than you would think. I know it's a jig, but because it's kind of a slow moving kind of jig, I find that the Dark Sleeper is like the magic rod for it. It's a little bit slowed down, which increases my hook sets, lets me move it really well. It does have a built-in internal hook in here that again kind of wants the hook set to be relatively, I'm not gonna say soft, but more just like a steady pull. So where a jig, I might normally just get a thunk, I might wind down, just crack the whip on them. With this, when it goes thunk, I just kind of wind down and I just kind of pressure set. And that's enough to get that hook to pop out of there and notch in there, and the land ratio is great. So there you go. Number 5, just in case they're on the bottom, Sleeper Craw from Megabass. All right, guys, that is a wrap. There are 5 interesting baits that you should try this October. I think if you will implement any of them into your lineup, I know they're all great fish catchers, so it's just a matter of getting comfortable with them, learning the ins and outs of the baits, and trying them on your own waters and seeing how that tool can kind of make a difference to what you're already using. So if you have any questions on anything that we covered, drop it down below. I will try to get answers for you. And enjoy October. Have some fun. Mix it up a little bit. Try to catch them on something maybe a little bit different than what you normally do. If you have any question on anything, holler. On behalf of myself, Jeff, everybody here at the Hookup Tackle guys, thank you for your business. Thank you for your support. And we will see you hopefully on the water, but we will definitely see you on another video soon. Cheers.